Hello, everyone. My name is Kate, and you're listening to Artwise. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Artwise. And if you're listening to this episode, I just want to give you a very special thank you from the bottom of my heart because this is the very first Artwise exclusive bonus episode, which means you had to pay to listen to this episode. And if you did do that, I appreciate you so much. I do this podcast all by myself, and it's really hard sometimes to put in 20 hours a week of worth of work into this podcast and not see any money come from it. Not that I don't love doing it, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I am like, oh, I put a lot of time into this to not get anything back out of it. But recently, we put ads on a lot of the episodes, and I am starting to see like a little bit of income from it, and it's all thanks to you. So I appreciate you so much in your support and allowing me to continue doing this and actually be compensated for the time and effort that I put into these episodes. So, if you read the title of this bonus episode, you'll know it's about Lisa Frank. So, some people might be like, who is Lisa Frank? So, if you are my age or older, then you probably remember Lisa Frank notebooks, stickers, folders, stationery, and school supplies. And if you don't, I'm going to put some pictures up here on the screen if you're watching the video version, or if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please go ahead and just Google her, because I guarantee you, if you're older than like 20 years old, you probably do in some way, shape, or form remember Lisa Frank stationery and school supplies. Today, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're going to be doing a deep dive on Lisa Frank. I do want to touch on the fact that like this is a bonus episode because this episode took a lot of time and research to put together. It was actually really hard to find accurate information about Lisa Frank. And I'll get into why in the episode. But basically, she is just this artist who has this very signature colorful, glittery product that was basically defined an entire generation. For a lot of people, their whole childhood was Lisa Frank. I had friends in elementary school, and even I actually no, by the middle school it was gone. But in elementary school, I did have friends who used a ton of like Lisa Frank, like everything they had was Lisa Frank. Their notebooks, all their folders, it's Lisa Frank stickers all over everything, Lisa Frank pencils, pens, like they had like all the Lisa Frank stuff. So it really did like define a few people's childhood. And I know if you're listening to this, you might even be one of those people. But as we will see throughout this episode, behind the colorful facade of Lisa Frank's brand lay a toxic work environment, poor business decisions, and ultimately the downfall of a once beloved brand. So I know I just like we were talking about fun school supplies and then I got a little bit dark there for a second. But that is what this episode is about today. It's not just the fun stuff, although I would like to include it because it is pretty fun. um, so again, Lisa Frank was once a household name and obviously a leader in the world of colorful and whimsical stationery. However, the company's downfall that happened in the early 2000s was not just a result of market changes, but also a result of like very incredibly poor business decisions made by its owner and founder, Lisa Frank, unfortunately. Love you, girl. Love your art. Your business had a lot of potential to be going for like ever because people legitimately love you. But sometimes, like, we don't make the right decisions, and that's okay. So, today we're going to explore the business decisions made by Lisa Frank that led to the failure of the company. And in turn, we don't see Lisa Frank stuff anymore. I haven't seen anything Lisa Frank unless I was actively going out of my way to look for it. Like 2 years ago, I did buy like a pack of Lisa Frank stickers on Amazon because I went out of my way to look for it. But unless you're doing that, you're not really going to see it anywhere, which is really interesting. So let's talk about Lisa Frank's life for a second before we get into her business and her business decisions and things that she did. So, Lisa Frank was born in Michigan in 1955, and she grew up in Tucson, Arizona. I almost always say Tucson because that is what my dyslexic brain wants me to say, but it is Tucson. And the only reason I know that is because I watched the entire show Last Man on Earth, and he was from Tucson. But anyway, Lisa Frank was also from Tucson. That's where she grew up, even though she was born in Michigan in 1955. And from an early age, Lisa, like other artists like myself, had a love for art. And she was particularly drawn to very colorful and whimsical designs, much like the artwork that ended up being a staple of her stationery products. So she actually attended later on as an adult the University of Arizona, and that is where she studied fine art, graphic design, and marketing. So she definitely got the education that she probably, honestly, I don't think you need, if you're an artist, and I've talked about this on this podcast many times before, so you probably know what I'm going to say. I don't think you need an education to be successful in anything. I don't think it's really an essential. But honestly, for what she ended up doing, great choice: marketing, graphic design, and fine art. I wish it would have helped her a little bit more in the end, but we'll get there. So in 1979, this is when Lisa Frank founded her company, Lisa Frank Incorporated. This is when she started putting her art on things and selling them. So her designs were an immediate hit, and she quickly gained a loyal following for fans who loved her colorful and whimsical style. She also, I know, and when she was in college and stuff, she also did talk about how she got started making like these posters for her friends and stuff. So that was like something that I think she probably eventually came to be like, oh, I want to do like a business out of this, because people were really liking her work, and she thought I can actually like monetize this and turn it into like a big business. And like I said, she gained a pretty loyal following fairly quickly, and in the 90s she became a cultural phenomenon. Everybody had Lisa Frank notebooks, stickers, folders, binders, like school supplies, stationery stuff. All her products featured rainbow colored unicorns, kittens, and other like super cute animals. And they were on backpacks, notebooks, like I said, a lot of school supplies, specifically. A lot of people who really were big Lisa Frank fans were children, which I makes sense. Like fun rainbow colors and unicorns. That adds that that makes sense. So, despite the brand's success behind the scenes, Lisa Frank Incorporated was actually a nightmare for its employees. So, former workers of Lisa Frank Incorporated talk about a toxic work environment, and they are very public about this. So the whole reason that I made this episode to begin with is because I saw a TikTok describing what led to the downfall of Lisa Frank, and I thought they were still around. I haven't been in school for a few years, so I haven't gone like school supply shopping in quite some time, but I honestly thought Lisa Frank was still around given like how huge they were just a few short years ago. So I didn't really know like the extent of what happened and how actually dramatic it was. But a lot of the former workers at Lisa Frank Incorporated are very openly describe a toxic work environment where they were subjected to verbal abuse, unrealistic deadlines, super long hours, unpaid overtime, so many things that just are horrible. And Lisa Frank herself was known to be a very demanding boss, and that she was never satisfied with her employees' work, and she would often fire staff members just on a whim. She was known for having like like it was very, what's that movie called? Devil Wears Prada. If you've seen the movie Devil Wears Prada, you know what I'm talking about. But very like to her assistants, just like unrealistic and like firing people for not immediately like knowing what she wanted and what she was gonna ask for. So, one of the first mistakes that Lisa Frank made was in her company's production process. So, Lisa Frank Incorporated actually produced all of its products in house. There was a warehouse, and this led to a very high cost of production. This made it super difficult for the company to compete with other brands that outsource their production to countries with lower labor costs, excuse me. So I don't know why I can't say that. So this is an interesting take because when I first read this, I was like, huh, like, but bringing jobs to America, I feel like is a very good and admirable thing. So I don't really, I kind of understand from a business standpoint why they would want to like outsource production to countries that have a lower cost of labor than here. But also like having that whole like made in America like stamp on, the back of all of your stuff, I feel like especially at that time, I don't know if this was just exclusive to like my childhood or what, but I know a lot of people at the time like constantly would like be like, oh, it says made in China, I'm not buying it. So I could have been like a poor business decision, but I don't know, I don't necessarily fully agree with this one. They also could have made, I think Lisa Frank stationery products and among other things were more expensive than just like their competitors, because it was Lisa Frank. It was like the Gucci, the Prada of like the childhood school supplies stuff, or at least that's how I remember it anyway. So they could have easily charged more to mitigate this cost of production. But another thing that this led to was it was pretty difficult for Lisa Frank Incorporated to keep up with the changing trends in the market, which required quick turnarounds for new designs. So the cost of production was kind of led to the other bad decisions in a sense, because when things changing in the market and trends changing within your niche that you work in require you to make things super quickly, it often can lead to you overworking your employees. I know that personally, when I worked for a big company during the COVID-19 pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, there were so many of us. Actually, everyone who worked because I worked in production, I was a production artist. There were so many of us who worked absolutely bananas insane hours. I remember at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic working like 60 hours a week to get these mask designs done, because like like change in the market, everybody's selling masks, everybody's buying masks because we don't know when this is going to end, and we did have to work crazy hours. I don't know of anything comparable to selling masks in the COVID-19 pandemic that would have happened in like the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, but it's kind of the same idea, right? Another issue was the company's reliance on a narrow product line. So, everybody that knows Lisa Frank Incorporated knows that they are known for their signature, glittery, holographic, colorful, rainbow, whimsical, childlike designs. But this aesthetic was very limited to stationery and school supplies. She, along with, I'm assuming, other executives at the company, could not expand this product line to include other items. Now, I'm already off the top of my head, I can think they could have done stuffed animals and like some other things like for children, because obviously their target demographic was children. I don't think it's hard to think, okay, who's my target audience? Like, what do they need? And think of more ideas. But they really honed down and honed in on the stationery and school supplies, and they failed to expand their product line to include other items. They could have done, like I said, stuffed animals. They could have done home decor or like room decor for children. They could have done apparel for children, accessories. There was a lot of things that they could have done, but they made the active decision to decide, let's just do school supplies. And this narrow focus made it super difficult for them to diversify their revenue streams. And that left them really vulnerable to changes in the market. If there was ever less of a need for school supplies, like it really screwed them to not have been more versatile in where they were making this income by just sticking to this thing. So, additionally, something else that Lisa Frank Incorporated relied really heavily on was licensing agreements with popular characters and franchises. So, two of the biggest licensing agreements that Lisa Frank Incorporated had were with Barbie and Disney. So, those are household names, even more so than Lisa Frank, which I know from talking to people. I kind of gave a little spoiler at the time that I'm recording this. This was actually only a little bit after I had a live interview with Kel from Artfit, who's from a previous episode. And I was like, oh, the first bonus episode is going to be about Lisa Frank. And he was like, who's Lisa Frank? So I guess it's not as much of a household name as I thought it was, but definitely not as big as Barbie and Disney. So these are big names to have licensing agreements with. And for anybody listening, this probably sounds like a home run for this company, Lisa Frank Incorporated, to have licensing agreements with popular characters and franchises such as Barbie and Disney. But these partnerships actually made the company dependent on the success of these brands. So, since so many of their products featured Barbie and Disney, at this time, if something happened to where Barbie or Disney or whoever they were licensed with was having kind of a lull or a decline in popularity, Lisa Frank also had a decline in popularity because half their stuff had Barbie and Disney on it. So obviously, all of these things, right, don't sound great off rip, right? Everything that I just spent 20 minutes going over doesn't sound the best. But this is where it starts to actually get bad. So in the late 1990s, Lisa Frank made probably the worst decision ever in her business. In 1997, she allowed her then husband, James Green, to take over as CEO of the company. When I tell you this was actively like shutting the door on the company, like closed, stamped, done, like, and I know she didn't know it, and she probably meant well, and she was probably like, I've been working so hard. I own this crazy, awesome, successful business. Like, I need a little bit of a break. I'm gonna turn this over to my husband. I understand the thought process behind it, but this effectively, over the next 10 years, destroyed her company, this decision that she made. At the time, Lisa Frank was one of the most successful women in the world, and she had a network of over $200 million. Even though she made a lot of mistakes in this company up until this point, so does every successful business. Every successful business has these little things like, oh, could have outsourced for production, could have done this, could have done that, could have not relied so much on these licensing agreements, but we still have a licensing agreement with like Disney and Barbie, so we're still successful. Like, she was one of the most successful women out there with this company up until this point. She had made a ton of money. And even though, people agreed that she was kind of a tough boss and kind of hard to work with, her business was actually really successful. And I honestly, I would think that that's probably what I described, her kind of wanting a break and not wanting to be like a CEO forever. That could have been the reason. Realistically, I don't know what was going on in her head to make her make this decision, but this again was the biggest mistake of trusting her husband to run this company. It costs her everything that she worked so hard for. So James Green, her then husband, he was not a good CEO, okay? He did not have any experience. He did not know anything about business. He knew nothing. Nothing to run a company as large, and at the time it was very successful, as Lisa Frank Incorporated. And he was the one who made this series of horrible decisions that hurt the company to the point where it just shut down completely. From being like up there with having these partnerships with these huge names like Disney and Barbie to like completely not existing anymore. So some of these things that he did to hurt this company include over expansion and ill-fated attempts to move to the clothing market. Under his leadership, the company lost millions upon millions of dollars, and its once loyal customers began to turn away and stop purchasing Lisa Frank merchandise. Even worse than his business decisions, notably, or arguably, I should say, even worse than his business decisions, because his business decisions were pretty bad, were James Green's personal decisions. So James Green was known for being like not a good person. He was known for having a very abrasive personality and a tendency to bully and intimidate employees, which I cannot fathom in a position of power where you're the CEO of a company, why you would feel the need to bully and intimidate your own employees. He sounds like he really needed to work on himself because hurt people hurt people. He would literally fire employees without cause, and he had security guards escort employees out of the building like in the middle of their shift. Under his leadership, he made Lisa Frank, like this was the point in time, like yes, people said that, you know, Lisa Frank was kind of a hard person to work for and she was a tough boss, but before this point in history, when James Green, her then husband, took over, she was not nearly as bad as him from the research that I've done and what I've read. Like honestly, and I hate to say it, you kind of have to be, as like a woman in a CEO position, you kind of have to be a little bit of a bitch, and I think that's all that was up until James Green took over, because he was actually horrible, like actually having people escorted out of the building in the middle of their shift, without cause, just to show that he could and just to have power over people. And this is why Lisa Frank Incorporated became known as one of the worst places to work in the entire country, which is crazy to me because when this all started, right, they had this really good idea of staying in the US and staying working or having like creating jobs in the US, which I think essentially is like a really good thing to do. If I were, again, like as a business owner myself, as the CEO of my own business, obviously not anywhere near the scale of what Lisa Frank is currently, I would love to hire people, you know, in where I live. I think that's like a nice thing to do, create, you know, jobs and income and give people a way to make money. But the second you hire probably the worst person in the world to do this specific job, you become known as one of the worst places to work in the entire country. Like, famously, worst places to work. So, again, the company's once loyal employees who loved Lisa Frank, they started to leave in droves. They were replaced with new employees who were often overworked and underpaid. The quality of the company's products began to suffer as a result of this because obviously, when you don't pay employees what they deserve to be paid and you don't pay them a living wage, they don't try very hard. You get what you pay for. If I wasn't making enough to live, I probably wouldn't try very hard at my job either. So that's completely understandable. Customers began to complain about this rapid decline in quality. And, this actually was the era that I was a child for. So, of course, as a 6 year old, 5 year old, 6 year old shopping for school supplies, I don't quite remember the quality being bad, but also, like, as somebody that young, I don't really remember. But there are people who were around for what I would describe anyway as Lisa Frank's peak, which I would say would be like the earlier 90s probably was when they were like peak fame, like probably. So, once their loyal customers who came to them for years and years and constantly were buying their products began to complain and stop purchasing from them, their sales just started to completely plummet, and Lisa Frank Incorporated was in serious financial trouble at this point. Another thing I want to note about James Green was he actually had an affair during this time as well, while he was basically, I would say this man ruined Lisa Franks, and everything she worked for in her life was ruined by one man. He had an affair with another woman who I believe was working at Lisa Frank Incorporated at the time. And he obviously just completely destroyed everything she worked on. And 8 years after she appointed him CEO of Lisa Frank Incorporated in 2005, Lisa Frank and James Green got a divorce, and Lisa Frank took back control of the company. But the issue is that the damage had pretty much already been done. She wasn't getting those customers back that she lost, and she wasn't getting those once loyal employees that she had before she appointed James Green to be the new CEO. So in 2005, Lisa Frank filed for bankruptcy, and she cited more than $40 million in debts, which is insane. So I know her network is like 200 million. That's almost half of like how much money that she had. So again, it's not fatal, but this company had big potential to even still be around today. And one man destroyed it all in 7 years, 8 years. Once she took back over, this company was forced to lay off pretty much everybody who worked there. After seeing the financial situation that James Green put her business in, she basically retreated from public life. She was like, "Oh, this is like so much worse than I thought it was. I am never going to show my face in public ever again." She actually even did like a interview, like a press interview here pretty recently, and it was just a blank screen. Like, she didn't even have her camera turned on for this interview because she doesn't, and she's always been kind of a recluse, right? Like, if you Google Lisa Frank, like photos of like Lisa Frank the human being, like the human woman behind Lisa Frank, there's only like two, maybe three pictures that come up of her like in existence. So she was already kind of reclusive, but like this really sealed the deal. Like, I feel like she was probably so embarrassed that she let a man come in and like ruin everything she worked for, and then like divorced him and dipped. And I could imagine how horrible she must have felt at this point. In 2005, after filing for bankruptcy, laying off her all of her employees, and this brand that was once like up on this pedestal as like a brand that worked with Disney and with Barbie and with other things, like, had to be basically shut down entirely. The company was in debt. Their products were not popular anymore. And of course, because of James Green, their reputation had been severely damaged. And of course, Lisa Frank, like, this was her baby. She had this since 1979. She had been owning this business for years, and she worked really hard to get Lisa Frank Incorporated to where it was, to being this like brand name. And of course, she made an attempt to save the company, but it was too late. So, once again, in 2007, Lisa Frank filed for bankruptcy and the company was eventually sold off to an investment firm. She tried really hard to maintain control of every aspect of this business after the point of James Green, which I honestly don't blame her for, because realistically, like, like, what are you gonna do, right? So I feel like after having something that traumatic happen to your business, there's definitely a lot of, I would say, distrust around, like, now, you know what, I gave this to somebody else and he freaking ruined it and now I have to fix it. Like, I totally understand where she was coming from, but this kind of led for her to insist on maintaining control of every single aspect of the business, and that made it really difficult for the company to adapt to changing marketing trends. So there's something that I do want to mention about this that I think is really interesting. So something that is like very commonly known, especially in the corporate world, is micromanaging. And I was very fortunate to, at my corporate job, my manager was really good about not micromanaging, but I have also worked under managers who do micromanage. And let me just say, like, that's basically like the need to have control over everything because you don't trust your employees to do their jobs. And when I tell you, that's probably, as like a manager and as a leader in any space, probably like the worst thing you can do is to kind of like sit there with like a magnifying glass at people who work under you, and try to make sure that they're doing everything perfectly. Like, you're going to get a significantly worse reaction from the people that you're working with, a significantly worse product outcome. And obviously, these people are not going to, what's the word? They're not going to like that. It's very hard to work when you're being scrutinized constantly and somebody's like, well, why'd you do it like this? Like, at every little thing you do. And it really can hurt a business. And I think it's also really important to, like, when you're looking at, for example, like the levels of a company, of a business. I, again, at my last corporate job, that was like kind of, a bigger business. I was very fortunate to have bosses who did not micromanage, but I have had previous jobs that were like less important, like, well, not less important, but less important to me in my life, I should say, where I was, a cashier, and I worked at a custom t-shirt shop, and those jobs I definitely felt like I was very micromanaged, and it was very hard, not just for me to work and get work done, but it was hard on my mental health too, because I was constantly being like told, like, oh, you are not doing good. So finally, Lisa Frank and most notably James Green, their management style, this is a major contributor to the company's failure. Again, if you don't have good managers in place to keep things running, like, that is going to hurt your company or your business more than anything else, because you already, these people are underpaying their employees, and now they have to deal with horrible managers too. It's like, you might as well just get another job. And I bet a lot of people who worked there and were once loyal employees when James Green took over, I'm sure that's exactly what they were thinking. So there are also some reports that Lisa Frank was kind of difficult to work with, and she had like a management style that was described as controlling and abusive, especially after the whole James Green situation. But even before, there were a lot of people who didn't like the way that she ran the company and the management style that she had. Again, I tend to like kind of cut her some slack in my own mind, because I'm over here thinking, well, she's a female CEO, like a woman CEO. She probably felt like she had to compensate for that, but it really didn't come across well to people. And in addition to her husband being like actually legitimately controlling and abusive, like, I'm sure they both had their faults, right? But controlling and abusive, again, led to employees leaving this work environment, calling it toxic, and also being very openly like, do not work here. This place is like horrible, horrible place to work. And that in and of itself, apart from all the other poor business decisions, having employees constantly leaving is a really easy way to destroy your business. So the company was also accused of just general mistreatment of employees. And again, like I said, people would work crazy hours and not get overtime. And also sometimes towards the end, when before the time that they were filing for bankruptcy, they would withhold paychecks because they couldn't afford to pay anybody. So again, Lisa Frank's downfall is it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of a healthy work environment. I feel like at the time that she signed her company over to her then husband, James Green, who turned out to be a real piece of work, that guy, she was at the top of her game. Like her business was doing so well. She had $200 million under her belt. She was making insane money, and she probably thought there was nothing that anybody could do to take this away from her. Now that she's built this name for herself, it was basically a household name at that point. So again, unchecked ambition, saying there's nothing I can do to lose this. Like I'm a household name now. I'm just going to sign it over to my husband, start my early little retirement I mean, she didn't retire. She still obviously worked at Lisa Frank Incorporated. She just wasn't the CEO anymore. But it really is like a cautionary tale of, check yourself, like, is this going well because you're putting in the work, or why is this business successful? How can you make it more successful? How can you treat your employees better? How can you create a healthy work environment that promotes your success and your employees happiness? When she did not take that into account, she really screwed herself. So again, her designs do remain iconic and loved by many. A lot of people still love Lisa Frank, and I think most of the people who do don't really know what happened. I know a lot of people who are big fans of Lisa Frank and her work, and I know for a fact that a lot of people my age, being so young, like for example, when in 2007, when Lisa Frank like was donezo, like no more, when she filed for bankruptcy the last time, and she had to lay everyone off and no one worked there anymore, I was 7 years old. So a lot of people that are my age, I know I didn't know this story until I heard about it on TikTok, and I was just super interested in wanting to learn more about this, because as like not only an artist but as a business owner, these are things that if you're trying to build yourself an empire similar to what Lisa Frank did and make all this stationery and all of this stuff, you really have to be mindful with what you're doing, make sure it's for the right reasons, because it will come back to bite you if you don't. So, in summary, just to sum up everything, Lisa Frank Incorporated, the downfall of that company was not due to one specific mistake, but it was a combination of a lot of poor business decisions that were made over time, both by her and her husband, James Green. I think especially by her husband, James Green, but I digress. There was the company's high cost of production, narrow product line, dependence on licensing agreements, lack of investment on digital platforms as well. Once times were changing after the 90s and the early 2000s, and people were starting to spend more time online, like they just weren't showing up there because they didn't want to learn a new thing, which is another thing that really hurts a lot of people, especially business owners, because I feel like as a new business owner myself, I am constantly learning new things. And I know for a fact that if I agree to like take this path and go down this path as a business owner, I'm going to have to be constantly learning new things, because not only is like the business world around me changing, the world around me is changing. So I think it's important to, again, like check yourself and be like, okay, am I not learning to do this out of laziness, or like what is it? Because clearly her business rapidly had success in the beginning, and she very quickly became a household name. So I think it's easy once we see that kind of success and that monetary success, it's really easy to forget where you came from, how you got started, and why you're seeing this success. So that said, I think the biggest lesson to be learned from Lisa Frank's demise in her business and the way that all of these things ended is you have to be willing to adapt and diversify your revenue streams, and also treating your employees well and creating a healthy work environment. Like, I know that there are so many companies out there, like ones that I've worked at. I'm not naming any names, but like I've worked at a few places that I really felt like I was not treated well. I come from a print shop background, and that does not make you feel good about yourself. I'll just leave it at that. But when you have a healthy work environment and you have employees that not only are being treated well and paid well and are excited to go into work, you're going to come out of that situation with a significantly better outcome. And I think the thing that Lisa Frank and James Green, especially James Green, both failed to realize is that these people that you're treating like crap and abusing and bullying and being mean to and making them hate their life at your company are the reason that your company is running and running as well as it does. And if you don't start treating people with the respect and that they treat you, because at the end of the day, obviously, right, like you could say, oh, their employees probably weren't great anyway. And I know a lot of people say that, especially a lot of rich people are like, people should want to work. There's the whole, what's it called, quiet quitting thing. A bunch of like higher up CEOs would constantly say like, oh, like quiet quitting, people don't, like, this generation of kids doesn't want to work anymore. No, like quiet quitting is actually just doing the job that you're paid to do and nothing more. And like anybody that has a problem with that, like that's absolutely ridiculous, because obviously why would I do something outside of my job description that isn't worth what I'm getting paid to do? Um and I think that that's something to be learned from Lisa Frank and her ex-husband. I think that, and if they haven't learned this lesson by now, I mean, this is what, 13 years? 20, 13 years, 16 years. I don't know. My math is so bad. It's been 16 years since this business went out of business. So I'm hoping that they can learn from that. So Lisa Frank, once again, was at one point the queen of stationery and school supplies, and her colorful rainbow whimsical designs captured the hearts of millions, especially children. However, behind this like rainbow colored facade, there was a toxic work environment, poor business decisions that led to her downfall. And while her legacy endures and people do still know the name of Lisa Frank, it serves as a reminder that success should never come at the expense of anybody's well being or the well being of her employees, of herself, of her husband. It's just not worth it. I feel like this is a really good tale speaking on like capitalism, because a lot of people will do a lot and destroy a lot of lives for money, and it's just not worth it. So, yeah, but that's the story of Lisa Frank and how her business kind of came to be and how it fell apart. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this bonus episode. I appreciate you once again so much for investing your money into this podcast. I really appreciate it more than you could ever know. Thank you so much for listening. And again, I will see all of you guys next Tuesday. Bye, everyone.